And joining us to talk about the bill and much more is Congressman Seth Moulton, a Democrat who represents the Massachusetts 6th District, which includes Amesbury, Lynn, Bedford, and Wakefield. And he's announced he's running for re-election this year.
Congressman, thank you so much for being with us today. After months of delays, Ukraine will finally receive that fresh shipment of weapons. What do you think got some of your Republican colleagues to finally vote yes on all of this?
Well, actually, they've been wanting to vote yes for a long time. When we sit in classified sessions on the Armed Services Committee, there's overwhelming Republican support. But they're all scared. They're scared of Tucker Carlson. They're scared of their own constituents. And so even though they support it behind the scenes, then they get out on TV and share some of the skepticism, the criticism of the extremists on the far right. The bottom line is that once the speaker finally said, hey, we're going to have the courage to let democracy work and just simply take this vote in the House, a lot of Republicans decided to do the right thing.
All right, regarding the part of the bill that dealt with the aid to Israel, a few Democrats objected to sending Israel aid during this humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Should the president or Congress have put some conditions on that aid to Israel?
You know, my position has always been that there shouldn't be any more or fewer conditions on aid to Israel as to any of our other allies. But there are conditions on aid that we send to any partner overseas, and the State Department and other organizations in the government will be making sure that Israel complies. Most of this aid is defensive or humanitarian in nature. Remember that huge Iranian attack, truly unprecedented against Israel. It's because of Israel's defenses and some of our own that we were able to prevent wide-scale civilian casualties that not only would have been devastating to Israel, but would have necessitated a response against Iran that would be devastating for Iran as well. So this aid is part of a down payment, not just on supporting an ally, but preventing a wider regional war in the Middle East.
Well, speaking of that war in Gaza, it's led to many protests here at home on several campuses across the state. And some Jewish students, especially at Columbia University in New York over the past week, have reported feeling unsafe. Have the protests gone too far, in your opinion?
Yes, they have. I mean, fundamentally, we live in a country that values freedom of speech. So that should be your baseline to start with. But these protests, in many cases, have threatened the safety of Jewish students. They've completely disrupted the operation of universities, preventing all the other kids from just being able to go to school. And so the universities have a right, and I would argue in this case even a responsibility, to shut them down. I was delighted to see Harvard just turned on the sprinklers the other day.
So we've seen that police response here as well to some of the students at Emerson College, and critics have argued that that was maybe a little bit heavy-handed. Do you think it was? Do you think they responded appropriately there?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, candidly, because, again, we have to respect the right to freedom of speech, the right to protest. That's fundamental to American democracy, and I'm not sure that the police need to be heavy-handed in breaking these protests up. But as long as they're threatening other students, they're a problem, and so the universities have a right to take action.
All right, so following up on the war in general, are you still in favor of a bilateral ceasefire, something you've called for in the past?
Absolutely. I mean, there should be a ceasefire for hostages deal that returns the hostages that have been in Hamas custody for hundreds of days now, and also, you know, provide some space for humanitarian aid to get into Gaza where it's desperately needed. I mean, there's no question that they're on the verge of famine, and a long-term solution here is not continued war. Israel has a right and responsibility to get rid of Hamas, but they have to have a political end game at the end of the day. And I think that having a hostage for ceasefire deal would give some more space to maybe help make that happen.
The national security bill also includes this ban for TikTok, which would happen unless the Chinese-owned company sold it within a year. And you and Congressman Jake Auchincloss co-sponsored that bill. Now, Senator Markey says, quote, there's no credible evidence, end quote, that TikTok presents a real national security threat. So how would you respond to that?
I strongly disagree with Senator Markey. I mean, the Communist Party of China controls the algorithm of the TikTok feed. So that means that the Chinese Communist Party can decide what information is sent to our kids. It can decide what information is sent to key districts in swing states for the November election. So if China wants to sway the election, the Communist Party just needs to call up TikTok and say, hey, adjust the algorithm a little bit, adjust the feeds that certain people are getting in those states to make sure that Trump wins. So if that's not a national security threat, I'm not sure what is. It's a threat to our democracy. And we're not saying that TikTok needs to be banned, not at all. We're just saying that it can't be owned by the Chinese Communist Party. I don't think that in the height of the Cold War, we would have allowed a news station like yours or, ABC News, CBS News to get sold to a party controlled by the Soviet Union. And that's essentially what's going on with TikTok right now.
But we do have newspapers that are owned by Chinese nationals that publish information that some people might think is Chinese or communist propaganda. Is it the content that's on TikTok that you're concerned about, or the data that the Chinese government may be able to access?
Well, it's really, in some ways, it's not the content, because the content is provided by users, but it's the algorithm that determines what content shows up on your feed, and it's all the private information of users that the Chinese Communist Party now controls. Those are the two main concerns. And look, this isn't perfect. There's a lot of private data that U.S. social media companies control that, in my opinion, they shouldn't. But this is an important first step to finally getting some reins around social media, which really has not had any regulation from Congress whatsoever. And we already see the consequences. It's not just national security concerns. It's the massive rise in childhood mental health issues. It's the fact that so many kids are addicted to social media. Congress needs to do a much better job at cracking down, and we're taking a first step with the TikTok bill.
So we mentioned Speaker Johnson off the top here. There was a lot of talk from some hardline Republicans about removing him because of this Ukraine vote. One of your colleagues, progressive Democrat Ro Khanna, said last week he would support the Speaker if there was a vote to remove him. Would you vote to keep him as Speaker?
I think he should make a deal with us. We offered to make a deal with Kevin McCarthy, and that was on the table. Kevin McCarthy was never willing to negotiate. Look, Speaker Johnson is one of the most conservative Republican speakers in American history. I don't think we should just give him a free pass. But I think the bar would be pretty low for a deal. I think he could agree to bring up a few pieces of Democratic legislation, for example, that he might not otherwise want to give the House a vote on. And if he were able to do something like that, then I'd be very open to supporting him, because, frankly, the alternative to Speaker Johnson could be even worse.
All right, let's switch over to some state politics now. I was very excited to notice a tweet of yours from last week. It's been banging a drum that I've been banging for a while. It started with comments from Massachusetts Transportation Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt, who suggested that the state could take tolls at its borders, and Governor Healey put out a statement saying those were not the views of her administration. New Hampshire gubernatorial candidate Kelly Ayotte, she of course weighed in and tweeted that her husband was a proud pickup truck owner, and that he only has one thing to say to Governor Healey: come and take it. And you responded, don't worry, he'll bring it to us because everyone wants to be part of the Bay State economy. And you thanked the secretary for the state for thinking differently about that. So talk to us about why you wanted to put that out there.
Because, look, first of all, I really support the secretary for just being willing to think differently. And I disagree with the Healey administration here. I think this should be on the table. The reality is that a whole bunch of people, we all know them, who moved to New Hampshire to avoid paying taxes in Massachusetts, even though they spend so much time here, they have jobs here. Why not make them pay a few tolls for the fact that they come back to work? That's totally reasonable. And a few years ago, I commissioned a study at Harvard to just look at how much everybody in Massachusetts is subsidizing our driving economy. Everyone complains about the subsidies that we give to the T, but how much are we paying just to be able to drive around on our highways every day? It turns out that number is like $14,000 for everyone in Massachusetts, even if you don't own a car. So the fact is, driving costs the state a lot of money. The people who are driving on our highways, especially if they're coming from out of state, maybe they should pay just a little bit to help defray those costs for everyone here in the Commonwealth.
So not ruling out tolls for up there.
Not ruling out tolls. No, absolutely. I think everything should be on the table. Why is it that we say we want people to take the T? We say that we want people to do the right thing for congestion, for the environment, for having a better transit service, get on the T, and yet it costs more. It costs more than driving. Why does it cost more for me to buy a ticket from Salem to Boston on the train than it does for me to drive my car over the Tobin Bridge? Those are the wrong incentives, and I think we have to have a serious discussion about that for the future.
Well, speaking of your favorite topic, the train, let's talk about it. You've long been an advocate for North-South Rail, connecting North Station, South Station. Former Governor Charlie Baker skeptical of that. Do you think Governor Healey may be more supportive, and could it be a reality?
I think that Governor Healey knows how to do math, and I think there's going to be some really interesting math that starts coming out about this project. This is something the Harvard Kennedy School has been working on, and the quick preview is that I think the North-South Rail Link will probably save money over addressing the capacity constraints that we have on our rail system by expanding South Station. So this is really the choice that Massachusetts has to make. Are we going to pour billions of dollars into expanding South Station, or are we going to build the rail link instead? Now, intuitively, you probably think adding a few tracks to South Station is cheaper and less difficult. But when you really look into this, it's quite a different story. The rail link would be transformative for being able to get around Massachusetts faster than driving today. That's the key. No one's going to take the train if you can't go faster than driving. The rail link would make that possible.
All right, let's talk about some more trains. When you look at Europe, I'm always struck at maps of how connected it is by high-speed rail. And obviously, not here in New England, not here across the country, but you have recently pitched a plan to invest billions in high-speed rail across the country. I'm hearing why you believe in this already through what you've answered, but do you believe there's an appetite in Congress for this?
Well, that's a great question. There's certainly an appetite among Democrats right now. For some reason, there's conservative opposition to high-speed rail. I think it might have something to do with the airline lobby, the auto lobby, and the oil lobby. But putting those political considerations aside, what we really need to see speed rail lines actually getting built so the rest of America will realize what we're missing. It would give us so much more freedom. We're a country of freedom. That's one of our core values. And yet Americans have so much less freedom than Europeans when it comes to traveling. We should be able to get to New York in an hour and a half. You should be able to get to Portland, Maine from Boston in 30 minutes. You should be able to get to Springfield, Massachusetts in 45, and you should be able to get to Washington in 3 hours. Don't tell me that that wouldn't make life a lot easier for everybody in Massachusetts.
Hard to disagree with that,
Not
right?
at all.
Yeah.
All right, so another elected official who likes trains, his name is Joe Biden. Our president, who is obviously running for re-election. How do you feel? How do you think the re-election campaign is going? Do you have any concerns at all about Joe Biden winning another term?
I am concerned, candidly. I think that there's a good chance that Trump becomes the next president, and that's why we all got to work hard to make sure that Joe Biden wins this election. I think that a second Trump presidency would be devastating for our country. It would certainly be devastating for our national security. Let's not forget, this is a draft dodger who slams veterans as suckers and losers. That's what he calls them. He slammed John McCain for becoming a prisoner of war, and he's been basically doing whatever Putin wants and telling China that he's not going to stand up to them if they invade Taiwan. So he is a real favor to the greatest autocrats in the world who are America's enemies. That's just one of many reasons why Donald Trump is a risk to our country, to our national security, and it's why we can't make him be the next president of the United States. So I'm going to be working hard for Joe Biden, but the message I'm sending to fellow Democrats, and frankly to all the independents out there who don't want to see our country go down the toilet, is you got to get out there and work too. This isn't going to be an easy election, so we got to work hard to make sure that Joe Biden wins.
And you just announced re-election as well. Will Democrats take back the House, do you think, next year?
I think it's a case where we have to work hard to make it happen. You know, the baseline math, just how many safe seats do Democrats versus Republicans have right now, that actually favors Republicans. Most Americans see how dysfunctional this Congress is under the House Republican leadership. It's actually the least productive Congress, I think, since around the Great Depression. So there's an appetite for change. We want leadership, and Democrats will deliver that. But again, this is district by district across the country, and we've got to work hard to make sure we win those key races that are so important.